first of all, just thank you so much, Dana. I know how much effort has gone into organising this, and it looks like a great programme. And obviously, thanks to Chalmers University of Technology and Chalmers AI Research Centre, as well as Mallow University for organising this event and allowing us to speak about the Ethics for You project. We're looking forward to a great afternoon. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview really of what we're doing in the Ethics for You project. I'm going to speak just for about 15 minutes to give an overview of the objectives of the project and what we've done so far and our future directions. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Paul Gibson, who is at TSP, Telecom Sud Paris, and he's going to give a demo of some of the resources that we've been developing as part of the Ethics for You project. So Ethics for You is an Erasmus Plus transnational project that's exploring the issues around teaching ethics in computer science. And the key focus of the project is to develop new teaching and learning resources. And that includes new curricula, best practices, and learning resources for teaching ethics to computer science students, or students in a sort of a related area. And it follows a train the trainer model. So we're developing resources for computer science lecturers across Europe. And these resources then are supposed to upskill computer science lecturers across Europe, these materials. So why do we think teaching ethics to computer science students is an important objective? Well, we look at many ways, I suppose, that new technologies have improved our lives. But in spite of that, I suppose they can't be regarded as unambiguously beneficial or even value neutral at this stage. And recent experience, and be this sort of coming from academic research or from the sort of horror stories that we hear in the media more and more frequently, many of these technologies, they can lead to unintended, and harmful kind of consequences. So we want to educate our students to think not only about, what systems they should build, but, whether and why they should build those kind of systems in the first place. So in this project, we're very big advocates of what we call consequence scanning. And we ask our students to think, before they develop systems. So we ask them, to think about these three questions in particular. So what are the intended and the unintended consequences of this product or even a smaller feature of the product? What are the positive consequences that we might want to focus on that will come out of this product or feature? But also, what are the consequences that we might want to mitigate when developing new technologies? So these are the objectives of the Ethics for You project. Firstly, we want to identify gaps in computer science lecturers' knowledge of ethics. And we want to develop a common understanding of pan-European values in ethics for technology. So the first two objectives have been addressed via reporting and survey, and I'm going to talk about those in a later slide. We want to develop an open repository of accessible online curricula, teaching and assessment resources to support teaching ethics to computer science students and students in related fields. So we have developed this repository with a number of case studies, some of which we'll present later. And it's right now it's available. It's open. We would ask people attending and so on to please have a look at the resources that we're developing. And of course, we as we go forward through the project, we would love if people would like to collaborate on developing more of these types of resources. We're going to produce practical guidelines and instructor guide for teaching ethics to computer science students. And our overall goals then are to develop a sustainable European community of practice in computer science ethics. And we want to work on that with our partners, for example, Informatics Europe, and also by running events like this, where we have people with an interest in teaching digital and computer science ethics and who want to be part of a community of practice. And then we will develop an online training program through what we call the HubLinks Global Labs model from a previous Erasmus Plus project that will provide material for the instruction of ethics. So these are our intellectual outputs that I'll go through quite quickly. The first intellectual output which we completed was a research report on European values for ethics in technology. And this report was in two parts. The first part used a semi-systematic literature review, which discussed and presented the origins of digital ethics, recent views from EU working groups on digital ethics, geographical perceptions of ethics, and a summary overview of pertinent ethics topics and challenges for an increasingly interconnected ICT world. In part two of the report, then, we presented the results of a number of focus groups that we ran, and these were conducted with 3 key groups of stakeholders. There were academics, ICT industry specialists, and citizens. And we captured their insight with regard to ethical concerns they have in new technologies. We also asked them about, the skills or training that future computer professionals should have, in an online world where they're developing technology, and who should be responsible for providing, that teaching or that training to computer professionals. So this report is available for download on the Ethics for EU website at the link below. We also, in an intellectual output number 2, was a research report on existing competencies in the teaching of ethics in computer scientists. So this was a very comprehensive survey. We surveyed over 60 European institutions, and some of the things we were interested in finding out was whether or not ethics is taught on computer science or related programs at each of the various institutions, the reasons why ethics is or is not taught, how it's taught, the background of the staff who teach ethics, and the scope of the computer science ethics curricula. So the report is available for download on the Ethics for EU website, but I think some of the highlights of the report are some of the things that we found very interesting coming out of the report, were, the reasons, for example, why ethics is not taught as part of a computer science or related program. The most common reason cited for that was a lack of staff availability or a lack of staff expertise in the area. Most people who teach ethics in computer science or related program, they tend to come from a technical background and not from an ethics background. We found that ethics is often taught as a standalone topic or a standalone subject rather than infused throughout computer science curricula. And most institutions tend to devote a relatively small number of hours to teaching computer ethics. 67% of the institutions that we surveyed, they taught 10 hours or less per semester. The other interesting finding, I suppose, that was computer ethics were considered to be most important for very specific topics like AI, intelligent systems, cryptology, whereas it wasn't considered to be that important for other topics, such as computer graphics, computer vision, simulation and modeling, and so on. And these would be areas where we would argue computer ethics is extremely important. I think somebody might be writing on my slides there. So our third intellectual output is an open repository of accessible online curricula, teaching and assessment resources to support teaching ethics to computer science students or students enrolled on related courses. So we're developing a set of teaching materials, and they're focused on case studies, where each case study has the following sets of information. It has a set of delivery notes, a set of lecture slides, some sample assessments, in-class activities, take-home activities, research papers, related materials, and links to other related case studies. And my colleague Paul, as I say, is going to give us a demo of that in just a few minutes. So why did we decide to adopt a case study approach? Well, this was inspired by research from other fields that's shown that using case-based instruction increases the student understanding of ethical issues and helps the development of moral reasoning skills. And when we were thinking about teaching computer science students, we wanted to present them with an opportunity to recognize dilemmas, to employ moral imagination, and by promoting active learning. And that often requires them to assume the role of participants in the decision-making process. And we recognize and we understand, I suppose, that this is slightly different to how computer science subjects are often taught. And that's why we're also focused on developing, instructor guides to aid with this type of teaching that will aid computer science lecturers in delivering these types of classes. So these are some of the examples of some of the case studies that we either have developed or that we're working on. They're focused on a wide variety of topics in computer science. So we're looking at, programming, testing, social media ethics, the Internet of Things, AI, machine learning, human-computer interaction, and so on. But we very much believe in what we call a distributed pedagogy approach. From our survey, we found that computer ethics it's often taught as a standalone subject, in spite of evidence that, infusing it throughout the computer science curriculum gives students a better understanding of the ethical impacts of the possible harmful effects of the technology that they implement. And we believe that a distributed pedagogy approach that reinforces the message that ethical reasoning, is something that you do as part of being a computer scientist. And by embedding ethics across the curriculum, we can see how ethical issues can arise from very many different contexts. So even though we have a primary a primary description or a primary theme for each of these case studies, we want them to be sort of reusable or adaptable across many topics. So, topics related to privacy should be reusable in AI modules, Internet of Things modules, maybe interface design modules, and so on. And the instructor guide that's associated with each of these case studies outlines, how that can be done. So as I say, just very quickly, some of the case studies we're looking at around one of the case studies, for example, the Irish state examinations in 2020 due to COVID. The physical examinations were cancelled. An algorithm computed the mark and indeed miscomputed many of the exam marks. And this was due to the code being insufficiently tested and containing errors which downgraded student marks. Another issue around software testing, we're looking at the Volkswagen emission scandal. Volkswagen had intentionally programmed their diesel engines to activate emission controls only during lab testing, which caused the vehicle's output to meet the US standards during regulatory testing, but to emit up to 40 times more emission in real world driving. And the ethical issues of the discussions that can be sparked here are really around the topic of software controlled machinery, how perhaps that can be more generally prone to cheating and so on. Social media ethics, and it tends to be one that, I think young people in particular are very interested in. We look at cyber harassment, online trolling, harassment, and whether social media companies, whether they have, an obligation to protect the users of these systems. In the Internet of Things, so far we've looked at e-pills, digital pills, smart pills. Those words tend to be used interchangeably. They're devices that contain a silicon chip in each of these pills, and they can relay, personal or health data to a wearable patch or device. And there are numerous ethical issues when it comes to digital pills, issues around security. For example, are these devices, could they be hacked? There's issues around, privacy and personal information, very, very private information. And then issues around, device malfunction and responsibility. Who's responsible in those kind of situations? I mean, there's a huge amount that can be done in terms of AI and machine learning, and probably we could develop case studies in that all day long. But we like to, one of the things we think is that, in computer science, it isn't all about AI and machine learning. That's what I suppose, driving a lot of the work in ethics, issues around bias and fairness. But we're keen to show that ethical issues are across the spectrum of computer science. The case studies that we're looking at in AI and machine learning, we're looking at autonomous vehicles, complex driving tasks that sort of successively been replaced by advanced driving assistance systems, and what are the ethical issues that go along with those. During COVID, online exam proctoring was something that became much more common during the pandemic. And we were asking students to turn on their cameras in their own private spaces while doing exams. And this is there's an interesting discussion now about whether, these practices, whether they will continue and whether we need to be questioning some of the ethics around those. We also, for more sort of, I suppose, a politically sensitive context, we've also developed some fictional case studies. So for example, around the impact of big tech in the developing world. We've developed a case study on that. And in terms of human-computer interaction, we've done a lot of work on the area of what are called dark patterns. So dark patterns are interface design choices that benefit an online service by coercing or steering or even sometimes deceiving the user into making unintended or potentially sort of harmful decisions, when they're purchasing or looking at stuff online. So as our approach to developing these case studies, each case study is developed by a research team where with at least 2 partners from the Ethics for You team. So our institutions collaborate on developing the case studies. Each research team is composed of at least 1 ethicist and 1 computer scientist. And we use an iterative approach to development. We refine after evaluating the materials with other team members, with faculty and with students, and we update and keep our materials live that way. We've developed an evaluation framework for evaluating the case studies, and it's multifaceted. We evaluate the content using the Lorry instrument. We evaluate the usability of the case studies using TAM. We also do expert interviews where team members speak with a sort of an expert and ask for feedback on the content. The lecturer themselves reflects after delivering the content, and then we incorporate student feedback as well. So as I say, I think that keeps our content very live and very, very up to date. This is how you access the case studies, but Paul is going to talk about that in a few minutes, so I'll just skip over that. And then just some of our intellectual outputs that are ongoing and coming up. We want to develop an instructor guide for the teaching of computer science ethics. So we're developing a booklet to guide the teaching. And one of the focus really in this will be on the differences in teaching technical subjects and teaching computer ethics. And that's specifically to aid computer science lecturers, because we recognize the differences, in teaching sort of, technical subjects. So guidance will be provided on mechanisms, how do you raise these ethical or moral questions? How do you give students the opportunity to formulate answers? How do you train them in justifying, explaining their answers, using reasoning, and also, facilitating different types of learning activities that we would be less familiar with in computer science, discussions, role-playing activities, and so on. We're working on developing a sustainable European community of practice in computer science ethics. And, one of the reasons we run events like this, we would love attendees to get involved and to become part of our European community of practice. We're working hard with Informatics Europe, who have developed a work group who are initially helping us evaluate the resources that we have developed. But will also be instrumental in getting the community of practice in computer science ethics, getting it going. And this community of practice, it will be a virtual community, and it will allow lecturers, to collaborate as they discuss, they share, they develop their knowledge and their experiences in delivering computer science ethics courses. And finally, we want to create a training program. So the training program will be focused on, how do we deliver this kind of content? How do we deliver content around computer ethics? How do we deliver this to computer science students? And we'll have a number of modes for this training program. We'll have an online distance learning model, a blended learning model, and we're currently working on a modular CPD. So just quickly to sum up, the existing and emerging technologies are posing increasingly difficult ethical dilemmas. So the overarching aims of our project, the Ethics for You project, are to design and develop curricula that can integrate the teaching of computational methods with ethical reasoning. We want to provide students with experience in identifying, confronting, and working through ethical questions, that they will face across many topics in computer science these days. And now, as I say, more and more of these topics are becoming interrelated. And the ultimate aim really is to equip graduates to produce beneficial and socially responsible computer technology. So I'm going to leave it there. I just want to acknowledge our partners in this work. Obviously, TU Dublin, we're leading the project, but we're working, very, very closely with Malheur University, Institute in Telecom or TSP from Paris, Informatics Europe in Zurich, and D-Learn in Milan. And I thank all the partners for their contributions. So I'm going to hand over to Paul now, if that's okay. Are you there, Paul?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to just turn on my video for a few minutes so people can see me, and if they don't know who I am, I apologize if it scares the living daylights out of them. I'm going to try and do the demo in real time using the website, but this morning the website was very slow, so I prepared a static talk as a sort of traditional presentation. So if the website doesn't behave itself, we can just go to the static presentation. I'm going to try and share my screen now with you. Maybe you can confirm whether that works or not.
It's working.
So that's working for you. That's great. So I'm going to try and do it with the actual website so that people can see. So the address is very simple. It's just ethicsforeu.eu. So this is the front page of the website. When I move my cursor, can you see that okay as well? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the front page of the general Ethics for EU website. And in fact, I'm going to be talking about the repository today. And the repository is found under the menu item repository. And in fact, there's two ways of getting into the repository. You can either go in without a login, so you can go in anonymously, or you can go in with a login. And if you go in with a login, it allows you to do additional things. So I'm just going to go in anonymously at the beginning. So I'm not going to log in with my account. I'm just going to go in as an anonymous user. Let's hope that it goes quick enough. Okay, so now we're in the repository. The repository is just a database of bricks. These are pedagogical educational bricks, as Dipna explained. And in fact, one of the things that we would like to be able to do is we'd like to be able to find a brick that suits sort of our requirements, or a brick in a particular area, or a brick that deals with a particular ethical conundrum or decision that has to be taught. Currently, the list of bricks is quite short, so we can actually just directly click on a brick by browsing the names. So I think the one brick that Dimna mentioned earlier, in which I was involved in, was the Volkswagen brick, which is to do with professional ethics. So I hope if we click on the professional ethics option, we can now see that leads us to the brick. And the high level at the right-hand side is there's a general template which nearly all the bricks can follow. You're not required to complete the template. You can fill it out partially, but this general template has general information about the brick. It has a contact person. In this case, it's me. It classifies the brick, and I'll talk about this later on in my short presentation. So this brick is classified for engineering students, and it's interdisciplinary with engineering in general and with law. And it mentions academic prerequisites, and it explicitly mentions learning objectives. So this is the sort of thing that you would normally see in a course description anyway. We then have a summary of the teaching approaches that have been used in teaching this brick. This brick has only been taught once, so there's only one teaching approach in there, which is the one that I used, which is based on problem-based learning. But we hope that as people use bricks, they will add in additional information on different teaching approaches or different ways in which they use the brick. And then as it's to be used with students, we have to give an idea of the academic load, the number of hours in class, the number of hours outside class. And we can give it optional paths of how to teach the bricks. So in this case, although I taught the brick as 9 hours, there's a path to go through it as 3 hours or 6 hours or 9 hours. And we hope that as people use the bricks, they will put in alternative paths and different ways in which they used it. You can download the lesson if you want to have it completely offline. And there's a lot of secondary material that's provided for this brick, but some of the bricks, there's not so much. So we have peer-reviewed papers from journals on the ethical issues in general. We have the professional ethical issues. We have ethical issues related to the actual problem, which is safety and security. And so we also have things that are from the problem domain, in which case it's transport. We provide links to popular press, and these are the most important things for us because this makes the case study very concrete. And the students really appreciate having links to articles by journalists, articles from social media, etc. It helps it to contextualize much more the importance of what they're learning. And the nice thing about this is we encourage the students to send us more things to download or to upload to the website to share. And we have multimedia, so we have videos, we have blogs, we have all sorts of different media. And we have permission to leave a reply if you've been logged in. So let me just go back to the repository now. So that gives you an idea of what a brick looks like. They have different formats, but now one of the key things is being able to search for bricks based on keywords or particular ethical. It's starting to go slow. Cross our fingers, otherwise I'll go back to my pre-prepared slides. So the idea is that we would like to be able to facilitate quite a complex search. Imagine if we have hundreds of bricks, which is what we're hoping in the end. We need to be able to not force people to browse through a whole list of things, but to actually be able to find something specific to their needs. I think I'm going to switch to my slides because for me, the website is not being very reactive. Okay, I'll just do that. I'm going to stop sharing this window and I'll start sharing another window. I'll be back in 5 seconds. So, does everybody see my presentation? Okay, so I apologize, I go to static approach, but the idea here is that at the front page, as we see in my presentation, there's just a search bar that allows you to write in free text strings. So for example, if you're looking for an ethical case study based on the domain of health, if you type in health, it actually will very quickly, if the site is being reactive, come up with smart pills. And these are intelligent pills that are being used where people swallow them, and there's electronic censoring devices in the pills, and even there's quite complicated microelectronics in some of these pills. Similarly, if you type in something more generic, you can type in legal, and we see that this search returns the smart pills example because there are legal issues that are treated in the actual brick that we teach. But it also brings up the autonomous cars ethics, where there's legal issues which are very important, and it brings up a test brick which was developed by Stefan just to show you how the bricks are constructed. So we see that the search results can actually produce multiple results. So we're going to have to work on how to prioritize the results and how to list them, and maybe how to do more sophisticated searching. But for the minute, that's not necessary because we've got such a small number of bricks that we're going to look at. So we can just see that the smart pills, which if I click on now, if you look down at the classification, it's interdisciplinary, and it actually considers biology and journalism, which maps onto what we do in terms of the health. Now, just to show you what you can do when you log in, there's a standard login page. There's nothing sophisticated in here, and you can give as much personal information as you want, but you can log in with very little personal information other than an email address and a name. And one of the key things is when you log in, you aren't required to do this, but you can ask for permission to be a brick creator. So when you log in, by default, you can just consume bricks, use bricks, see how they're used, etc. But if you want to submit a brick, you can ask for permission to be a creator, and that's quite an easy process. You just click a checkbox for yes, you want to be able to create, and then whenever you come back to the site later on, you will have permission to create a brick. Once you've got permission to create a brick, there's now an option for creating a new brick on your welcome page. And it goes through a very simple online form to help you to complete the template. And as I said earlier, you don't have to complete everything in the template. It can be partial. So there's standard information, the name of the brick, what's the domain, etc. We then have the keyword classifications, which are helped with the search process. So we have classified different ethical issues: bias, fairness, security, autonomy, data protection. So we're continually thinking about updating this. As we see more and more case studies, we will update the classification. There's an educational classification. It's actually a little bit richer than this, but this is just to simplify. It's to classify what it is you're teaching. So for example, in the brick, which I did on the ethical issues around Volkswagen, it's classified as software engineering, but within software engineering, it's actually embedded systems, and it's to do with verification and formal methods. So we have a kind of a tree of classifications for this. And then the domain is just health, finance, energy, materials, because sometimes you're looking for something in a particular domain, industrial application. We also highlight the key issue of interdisciplinarity. We want people to work with other departments and with other disciplines. So we promote the idea. So for example, the intelligent pills, we have interdisciplinarity with journalists and with people who work in biology, which it actually encourages and motivates the students to be working with people in other disciplines. Finally, there's a lot of support material. So there's things like further reading. We can have a feedback mechanism, and we have a download mechanism for downloading the feedback and to be able to react to the feedback. And just as an example, Stefan Mag, who helped develop the website, I can't take responsibility for this website. I didn't do any work. So all the good stuff is thanks to Stefan and his students and his team. But there is actually a nice mechanism for leaving feedback, both from the users of the bricks and also for the people that are developing the bricks. And as I said, there's no obligation to actually be a producer of bricks. So we encourage you to sign up if you're interested. There's no cost, it's free. It takes you maybe a minute at the website to sign up, and then you'll have access to leaving comments and seeing the comments from other people. And if you need any more additional information, there's our contact details, either through email or directly through the social media contacts that we have. And I ran over a little bit, I'm sorry, but I hope that was clear to everybody.
Thank you very much, Paul, for a very interesting presentation. And also thank you, Dimpna, both of you making a great introduction for the workshop. And our next block in the program are our two keynotes. The first one being Viola Schiaffonatti, who is Associate Professor of Logic and Philosophy of Science at Politecnico di Milano. She holds a PhD in Philosophy of Science from University of Genoa, and she has been visiting scholar at Department of Philosophy of Science at the University of California at Berkeley, and visiting researcher at Stanford University. She teaches computer ethics, philosophical issues of computer science, bioethics, and ethics seminar. Viola is going to present a talk, Why and How Teaching Ethics to Computer Science and Engineering Students, Current Issues and Future Challenges. Please, Viola, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. And I will try mostly to raise some questions that I believe are very important, and then hopefully to discuss possible answers with you all together, and also in the second part of the meeting. So let me share my screen. Is anything okay? Can you see my screen? Okay, so more or less my program for today is the following. I will start with let's say a very bottom-up approach because I will start with a personal example, the course that I teach in computer ethics, and I will use it as a representative example to discuss some of the issues that I think are needed to be discussed. But then after that, I will present a wider framework in which I will try to argue in the following directions. So first direction is that it's very important not focus only on ethics, but to enlarge the picture of the topics that need to be taught to computer science and engineering students. Then also I will try to argue that this kind of revolution in the education of computer scientists must be linked to a sort of revolution also in research. So it's not only a matter of education. And then I will try to emphasize how it is important to reason on these issues, not only at the level of a single institution, but if possible, to involve several institutions. And then I will conclude with some open challenges to be discussed together. So let's start with this example. This is a course in computer ethics. And this is a course of 5 credits. Students are students in the master's degree of computer engineering at Politecnico di Milano. And this is a course that it's quite recent. It was decided some years ago. It lasts 1 semester and it's an optional course. So students can decide if they are interested and they can add to their curricula. And it's a course that in the last years has received attention from students because they are always more than 100 students involved in the course. So let me just tell you a little bit about the goals of this course and the aims. So in general, I can say that the idea is to use ethical theories and to apply them to the problems that are created, aggravated, or transformed by computer technology. So in a nutshell, the idea is to give students a chance to reflect on the ethical, social, cultural impacts and consequences of computer technology. And so to become aware of these issues, ethical and social issues that are connected mostly to the design of information technology. So this design part is very much important in the approach, because the idea is that they can become aware of how it is important to look at some design issues using an ethical lens. So let me emphasize a very important point. The idea of having such a course is, of course, not that these students will become experts in ethics, okay? If you remember, it's only 5 credits and just 1 semester. But the idea is that students are becoming aware, or they become aware during the course of these issues, of the importance of these issues, and also they become aware and capable of interacting with people coming from different disciplines. This is very important, and I will say something more in the following, because I think it's very important for their future professional life. And so let me just add this point. This is a recent paper discussing in particular the engineering ethics education. So it's not specific only for computer science and engineering, but it's interesting because it's a review paper, very rich review paper, discussing different goals for teaching ethics in this context. And here you can see that these goals are can be further articulated. So, for example, one of the goals is to teach or to improve the moral sensitivity of students, and then in the goals you can see that this category can be split into developing proficiency, recognizing social and ethical issues in engineering, or encouraging students to take ethics seriously, and so on. So it is very interesting because I think, and this is again another point, I think that it's very important to try to recognize single efforts, like single courses that we teach at different institutions, into a wider framework, which is a framework also of research. Of course, this research is quite recent, but it's important to try to connect. And I can speak for myself. This is something that, I mean, was not so debated at the beginning when I start teaching these courses. I'm a humanist, a philosopher, into a technical university, and I realize now that at the beginning I had a kind of artisanal approach to to teaching this kind of courses, and a lot of my efforts also were based on a kind of trial and errors approach. But now research is moving ahead. There are a lot of experiences. There's, I would say, a systematic approach to the discussion of these issues. So I think it is important to take them into account. So let me now focus on the topics that I usually teach in this course. I would say that I can divide them into 3 categories. So there's a part in which I teach topics that are quite general. So they are not only devoted to computer science or to information technologies. And in particular, this part is a part in which I focus a lot on responsibility, in particular from an engineering perspective. And I focus a lot on engineering, on design ethics, and on the ethical issues that emerge and need to be managed in the design of technology. Then I have a central part, which is the core of this course in computer ethics, which is particularly related to computer technologies, information technologies. Here you can see a list of possible topics, from privacy to codes of conduct. These topics can vary from one year to another year, but there are some, let's say, pillars that I think are very important, like, for example, I don't know, digital intellectual property or privacy. And then I have invited lectures, some invited lectures, a couple of invited lectures on specific topics. And this is also important because it's a way to invite people that are doing research on, let's say, very, let's say, front type of topics. And this is also very important as a message to students. The message is that there's a lot of people doing research, philosophical research on these topics. And so they are not just topics to be ready to be taught, but they are open issues and objects of debates. So let me just focus a little bit on the part about responsibility, because I think it's important, because it gives me also the opportunity to say that I think that this general part, so not only focus on computer science, are very important. And for example, let me tell you a little bit the type of approach that I use when I discuss about, for example, accident causation and responsibility. So the idea is that, of course, it is important to focus on what is called first order causes, like, for example, pressures in the production, or a problem of communication, or lack of training of the people involved in the accident. But I think that, of course, it's essential to focus also on the second order underlying mechanism that generate these accidents, like, for example, factors that are at the level of the individual agents, the context in which these agents operate, the workplace culture, the political environment, and so on. And something that also I think is very important when discussing about responsibility, it's that we can combine a sort of passive and active approach to the responsibility. So in the traditional ethics of technology, the traditional approach is the so-called backward-looking type of responsibility. So the idea is that an accident is occurred, then we try to look back and see the chain of the responsibility. But today's, it's also very important to adopt what is called an active approach to responsibility. For example, the value-sensitive design is an approach along this line. And the idea is to try to anticipate possible problems at the level of the design, and also to try to promote positive effects at the level of the design. This is very interesting because to see responsibility starting from these two perspectives, it's a way to also discuss the complexities of responsibilities. Like, for example, when you design an artifact for trying to promote positive effects, the point is that it's not enough to just say that the goal is positive. So you have the goal of designing this artifact with positive effects. There are a lot of issues that need to be considered, like, for example, when you adopt artificial intelligence, for instance, in this kind of artifacts, there's the problem of autonomy of the people who are involved. There's the problem of the delegation of the choices to artifacts, and so the problem that people can become lazy in decision making and so on. So this is just to tell you that here this part about responsibility is not only focused on problems and issues emerging in the field of computer science and engineering. I like to have a wider approach to these issues, and I explain later why I think this is important. So let me tell now something about the approach of this course in computer ethics. And I want to be clear that I think case studies are essential, very important. I mean, you cannot start from theories if you have like people that mostly are not trained in philosophy, for example, but I do think that case studies are not enough. So I try to integrate many examples, many case studies. Maybe I don't analyze these case studies in full details every time, but I think that it's very important also to try to provide some theoretical frameworks. And these theoretical frameworks, of course, you can provide in different ways, but I think this is a very important part. And I think also something that is open to the debate on how it is possible to balance between this practice in the sense of the case studies and the theory. Then, of course, you need time. And so usually you need time to take your time to explain and to look for this balance between theory and practice. So usually I prefer not to cover all the possible topics, but just to focus on some topics and go deeper into them. And I think this is also important from a methodological point of view, because again, students can get the idea that these issues are also very complex if we want to discuss them seriously from an ethical point of view. And as I was telling you, my focus is not only on computer science, it's more on also engineering, because they are computer engineers, but it's also more on some general issues like responsibility. I think also this is important because it gives students the idea that there are issues that are, I mean, overarching, and not just for computer science students or engineers. There are some issues that it's interesting also to look using different disciplinary perspectives, like responsibility is a matter if you are, for example, a civil engineer, and is maybe a slightly different matter if you are a computer engineer. So this is why I focus also on this more general part. And this, I think it's very important to discuss the approach, because again, we need to focus on the method, again, to move on from like a trial and error approach to something more rigorously based. And of course, in the literature, there are many different teaching methods that are discussed. This is just a list, but it's not exhausted, like from case studies, lectures and presentations, to role-playing activities, different types of discussions, voting, games, films, fiction, community service, field trips and visits, okay? But what I think is very important is that there's still limited empirical research on the effectiveness of these approaches. And I think that it's important to try to have more research on this and to try to assess these methodological choices in a stronger way. Okay, so I can say that in my experience, some methods work better than others, but I think it's time to move from a sort of anecdotal evidence to a more, let's say, formal or methodologically grounded approach in discussing these issues. So now, what about the outcomes of this course in computer ethics from a learning point of view? Of course, to acquire this broad perspective of the ethical and social impacts and implications of information technologies, to recognize that information technology is not only about technology, but it's about ethical, also about ethical and social aspects and issues. I think it's very important that students are able to use their critical skills in clarifying and analyzing from an ethical point of view, case studies, examples, also historical examples, and also that they become aware of the possibility and also capable of exploring the possibilities for solving or for diminishing some ethical and social problems, again, at the design level. These students are going to be designers in the large sense, at large. So they need to become capable of this kind of approach. And in general, I think that they should that having courses like this is a way to be better prepared for their future professional life in an ethically and socially responsible way. So what about the assessment of this course? This is a huge effort. And it's a huge effort because you remember I have like 130 students, and basically each of them will present in class, will write an essay, and then we'll have also an oral examination at the end of the course with me. It's a huge effort, but I think this is necessary. Again, this is an essential part because I really want to avoid standardized tests in this type of course because they are risky. They can be interpreted as a sort of attempt to bring a positivist approach in the context of a technical culture with a non-technical subject. So I think that nuances are very important, and so this is something that requires a lot of effort in the assessment. But again, this stresses a message. And the message is that ethics is not a checklist, is not a manual with the right answers, but it's a complex process. And so as a complex process, the outputs of the students need to be evaluated. So this idea of the future reflective professional, I think, is one of the core elements of this discussion. And again, they are not they don't need to become professional ethicists at the end of the course, but they need to become aware, okay? Aware of the particular ethical and social issues of computer science, but also a little bit aware of the ethical and social issues of science and technology. Again, this is why I like to focus also on some general themes like responsibility. In a sense now, it is almost obvious because it's some years that these topics and this type of approach has become popular, but it's true to recognize that still there's some skepticism around these topics, and in particular around teaching these topics to computer scientists, computer engineers. And this still requires time. So it's a long process. And this process, again, speaking from my experience, is a process that mostly involves colleagues and not students. Students, in my experience, perhaps because my course is not mandatory, but students are very open and they really like discovering different perspectives, discussing topics in a different way. Colleagues are still very skeptical for a number of reasons, but I think that one reason is that many colleagues are just thinking that you can be rigorous only when you use like numbers, formulas, equations, and so on. So they don't know about the rigor of philosophical argumentation. Sorry, there's
I had a shower.
Sorry,
Ages
there's
ago.
a microphone.
I locked the door then. Forgot all about it.
Sorry.
How are you? How are you getting on?
Okay.
Are you in a meeting?
Conference.
Sorry, there's a microphone. My
Yeah,
microphone is open.
Well, I've done.
Sorry, someone is talking.
My microphone is open, so it's very difficult. Okay, now I think it's closed. So this idea that there are different types of reasoning, and that you can be rigorous even in the absence of numbers, formulas, and equations is very important. Students at the beginning are a little bit skeptical of this, but then they recognize and they're mostly happy to discuss these issues. And then, of course, there's a problem related to skepticism, which is a practical problem, but then it's in the practice, it is very serious. Because the point is, if you want to add new contents, maybe new courses in computer ethics and similar topics, perhaps you need to eliminate some old ones. And so the problem is that there's no space, or there's sometimes there's no space, and sometimes there's no willingness to create new space. Okay, so but this is I believe this is a serious issue, even if it's very practical. Okay, so let's see now like another issue that I think is important. That is like the fact that things are changing a lot in these last days. But the point is that, so it's very clear that technology, science and technology are having a strong impact on our society, both at the individual and a collective level. It's plenty of example, and I mean, every day also on the newspapers and in the media. So this is quite clear today. And ethics, in a sense, plays a central role in this picture for a number of reasons. Like, for example, usually it's easier to introduce courses in ethics into the technical curricula rather than courses in philosophy or other philosophical topics. In this sense, ethics is very immediate and it's very easy to understand, precisely because we perceive, we feel every day the impact of technology at a social level. So it's becoming also a matter of fashion and visibility, and I will say that this is very good. I'm very happy. I remember when I was the only, let's say, humanist in my whole university, and the level of skepticism around me was very high. nowadays things are changed, but this visibility needs to be handled in a careful way, okay? There are some risks. So let me say now something about the wider framework that I think it's important to discuss. And by discussing this wider framework, I hope to show why this paradigm change that I think is very important needs to be discussed in this paradigm change. So I will say that it's not just a matter of teaching ethics. It's not only a matter of teaching, but also to involve research, and also it's not only a matter to focus on a single institution. Okay, why not only ethics? Why I do believe that ethics is just a part, very important part, but it's just a part of a wider context. I think it's important to expand to other topics, other fields. This is a list, of course. This is a not exhaustive list of topics, of fields, of areas, from philosophy of science to history of science and technology. But I think this is important because this is a way also to add further dimensions, which is, of course, is a way to introduce more complexity, but also it's a way to try to bypass the rhetoric of soft skills. Ethics and other humanities and social sciences topics and disciplines sometimes are referred as soft skills. And I think that this label of soft skills is detrimental. Detrimental in particular if you use it within a context in which, let's say, scientific and technological knowledge are regarded as the most important ones. So there's an issue, and we have to recognize that this is an issue. So a way to try to partially solve this issue is to add complexity and to show how things are articulated, how these fields are articulated, and how the different perspectives can be provided by adopting different disciplines and different disciplinary approaches. But then again, the problem is how to make room for new contents in curricula that are already very crowded and in which usually technical and scientific concepts are given priority. And I don't have any definitive answers on this, because this is, I think, is one of the issues that needs to be discussed. So what about, oh, sorry, I have, can you see my screen? Okay, so why I think that we need to move from, education to a larger context. I do think that there are some reasons, and one reason is, again, complexity. If these courses from computer ethics to philosophy of science are taught by instructors that are doing research on these topics, they are able to show the complexities of these topics and the fact that these are not just, okay, this is not just a checklist, okay? And I think that usually this is a problem, and this is also reported in the literature. For example, many instructors, for example, in the engineering fields, teaching, for example, ethics to engineering students, report that they feel that they lack guidance and training on how to teach ethics. But it is, of course, a problem. And this is why I believe that this course should be taught by people that are really involved in the research and that can avoid a form of simplistic teaching. I know that this can be an issue. I'm not arguing that these courses can be taught only by professional philosophers or ethicists, but I'm arguing that it's important to involve instructors that are aware of the complexities of these subject matters. And a way to do this is to integrate research and teaching. So in a sense, we need a new generation of scholars that are trained in the humanities and social sciences, but that are deeply acquainted with technical and scientific areas. And for example, people working in departments of science and engineering, and that are really able to teach students that are not educated in the humanities and social sciences. So the point here is that you cannot teach computer ethics in the same way to philosophy students and computer engineering students. And this requires a proper education. This requires an articulated background. So this requires a new generation of scholars. So let me go ahead, and I will move toward the end of the talk with an example. This is an example that again stems from my personal experience, and this is an experiment that we started some years ago at Politecnico di Milano, and we founded this Meta, which is a group of scholars from the humanities and social sciences. We now are about 20 people, but we started and we were just 3 people 5 years ago. So I think it's a good, very good improvement. And I think it's very important, the fact that each of us has an experience. Sorry, can you close the microphone, please? Because I hear a very strong background noise. Okay, thanks. So each of us has a specific expertise in the philosophical, ethical, and social issues related to science and technology and engineering. And this is why we have selected this Meta name. So we reflect on science and technology. But at the same time, each of us is, let's say, embedded in a department, in a different department, and we are doing research with our colleagues coming from science, technology, and engineering. So Meta offers different courses. So we were able to enlarge let's say, the number of courses that can be offered. And they are mostly at the master and doctoral level. And they are of 2 types. We have mostly standalone courses, but we started with so-called integrated courses. Let me tell you something more about this, because I think it's very important for the future. So these integrated courses are courses in which the instructors, they have typically 2 instructors, and these instructors have expertise. One instructor has expertise in the humanities and social sciences, but also the other instructor has a background in science and engineering. So the idea is to have these courses that are co-taught co-taught by two different instructors and working together in the class at the same time, stay in the class at the same time. And I will say more also about this. This is
sorry,
yes.
You are running 15 minutes over time.
Sorry. So I will conclude. So what about the challenges of this? I was, sorry, Gordana, I was just thinking to have 1 hour and to have 50 minutes for the discussion. Sorry, this is why I'm late. So these co-teaching activities, I think, are very important. And this is a way to try to solve the problem of expertise, but they are very expensive. So hopefully we will have time to discuss more on these co-teaching activities, okay? And there are problems. I will skip this part. Let me just move to the conclusion. And the conclusion is that to change let's say, to try to solve some of the possible challenges, we need to implement strategies at the, let's say, institutional level. And these strategies at the institutional level are difficult for a number of reasons: money, space in the curricula, limited resources, lack of guidance, and so on. But I think that there's a way to try to, let's say, move in a different direction, in the sense that, for example, we can use, let's say, for example, relationships with other universities. Like, I don't see my slides, but anyway, we can just, let me, sorry, I cannot see my slide, but anyway, so this is the last slide. So I think that future challenges can be divided at the level of the institution, Politecnico di Milano, in which I work. And of course, we have two big issues: how to involve bachelor students. So far, our courses are mostly at the bachelor and doctoral level. And how to solve the sort of problem of having this course. So far, these courses are electives. What about to make them mandatory? This is an issue, and we need to discuss. But then at the general level, I think that we have mostly three challenges. As I was telling, the first is to educate a future generation of humanists and to integrate them into a context of in which science and engineering are like the focus, the core of the teaching and research. The second is, okay, we are living in a moment in which ethics is popular, computer ethics is even more popular, but we need to exploit this moment in a systematic way, not just to follow the fashion. And third challenge is to try to promote a real, and then we can discuss what real means in this context, and long-standing integration. So not just a way to solve issues that are urgent at the moment, and then not try to think about these issues in the middle and long run. Okay, sorry if I was late. There are several questions, and I hope to discuss with you.
Thank you very much, Viola, for this extremely interesting and well-informed and inspiring talk. I would like to ask you one thing. Maybe you can write down 10 most important things that you would like us to discuss afterwards.
Sure.
Thank you so much. It was really an experience. Okay, and the next, we have no time for questions as we are running out of time. We are 15 minutes late, but our next keynote speaker is ready. That's my colleague Carl de Licht from Chalmers University of Philosophy. He is a senior lecturer in ethics and technology, and he is currently engaged in course development and training of teachers in the field of ethics and engineering. He holds courses on the intermediate and advanced level on the same subject. His research is mainly about social sustainability in urban development and artificial intelligence in public decision making. Before he received his permanent position at Chalmers, Carl had a position as a researcher and project manager at the Research Institutes of Sweden, RISE, as well as a teacher and researcher at the University of Gothenburg, Uppsala University, and KTH, Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. Please, Carl, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. So I've been to a lot of different places, and I think you said, Gordana, but I'm also have a PhD in practical philosophy, which is moral philosophy. Right, so teaching ethics to teachers and engineering students, walking a tightrope between puzzle solving and despair. So I really loved Viola's talk. It was broad and focusing on the big questions. This talk will be more narrowly construed. So I actually wrote up the talk after I saw Viola's title so that we wouldn't talk about exactly the same thing, even though we'll see that I have sort of the same take on much of the things she discussed. So let's see here if we can get this going. So the context for this talk is a course, or if we have modules during a program, a lot of modules during an entire program. So the ambitions I will talk about in a second is related to more substantial educational stuff, so to speak. So it's not just a single module or something like that. I'm talking about something bigger here. So courses, as Gordana said, I have 2 7.5 credit courses, 1 master's course in ethics and biotechnology, which is obligatory for everyone who takes a master's in biotech at Chalmers. And I also have an elective course in ethics and technology. And I also do these sort of parachute teaching things, or to some extent anyways. But this is more into sort of like how to think about what sort of engineering students we would like to have if we are ambitious and if we are thinking about courses and a lot of modules. So my ambition is, when I hold a course, is at least these 7.5 credit courses, is that I want the students to be able to solve, or at least starting to solve, moral problems in a transparent and a well-reasoned way. Now here I want them to be able to understand what the process is for starting or solving a moral problem or issue. But also I want them to be transparent when it comes to what they deliver, the results, so to speak. So if they write, for instance, a memo, a one-pager, a essay, or what have you, I want them to be able to produce a conclusion or a thesis, something they actually argue for. And then I want them to use different arguments, and I want them to show that they know what sort of arguments they need to use. And I also want them to be clear about what these arguments are and what the thesis is. So that's another thing I want them to be able to do after a course. I also want them to do, or be, reasonably confident. Not overly confident, not terrified or something, but something in between, reasonably confident in their solutions. So I want them to say that this is our solution. Of course, it's tentative. It's a hard problem. Every serious moral problems are, but this is what the best we could do this far, and we sort of believe in it. So I want them to be in that sort of place. So this is what I want them to be able to do on their own when they either when they do their master's degree, or when they are out working, or when they are home sitting thinking about what they should do with their lives or what have you. I want them to be able to contribute to solving those problems or solving those problems, and that should be done in a transparent and well-reasoned way, so that they use good arguments, but also that they actually can see what these arguments are, and that they are reasonably confident in these sort of solutions. So that is a high ambition, but that is what I want them to do. And this has in part to do with my 5 years at RISE, where I was hired as a philosopher, the first philosopher. Now they have several. But these were sort of like the criteria or the things they wanted from me in this role. It was not just to say, well, you know, it's complicated, and then sit back and enjoy myself. They wanted an answer, but they wanted actually clear arguments in favor of that answer, so that they could by themselves sort of push back, but they also wanted me to sort of push for the solution. So it has to do with that, but it also has to do with my being a teacher at the medical program, teaching doctors or both who are practicing as physicians, but also those who got an education. They have a lot of hard problems to deal with every day or almost every day, and they don't have that luxury either to be able to say, well, you can do this, you can do that. Well, I don't know. They need to take a decision. So that is what I want them to do, as if they are project managers, saying, arguing for a certain way to do, or taking in sort of like, should we go and work with the military or what have you, or when you are an engineer sitting and doing some programming or what have you. Now, one problem I've seen with one approach, and or it is puzzle solving, that they become too much of puzzle solvers instead of really engaging with the problem. And I'm going to say something about what it is, because this can be really great. It's great that people are puzzle solving and thinking about ethical issues as puzzles that needs to be solved, or at least sometimes it's really good. But I think it can be too much of this great thing. So for instance, should we edit the human germline? That's a topic which I discuss with the students on the biotech program. And one approach here I could use is to have a lecture where I sort of discuss different sort of normative theories or principles, perhaps. In biotechnology, we have these sort of principles from the Beauchamp and Chalmers, where we say, for instance, we should not harm, we should benefit, we should not violate people's autonomy, we should be fair. Those are the 4 principles, and then they are spelled out in different sort of ways. Now, if we, when we take this approach, the ideal type of this approach, many people or many colleagues to me who are engineers and are doing ethics, or who are ethicists or philosophers doing ethics in these sort of contexts, they pick out certain principles or certain theories which are precise enough to be able to say something about the practical situation at hand. So if you have this sort of question and you have a context for it, perhaps you watch a movie, perhaps you read some text, perhaps you have a lecture on the subject. We have lectures on the biotech program. The teachers come in and hold empirical lectures, and then they discuss these lectures from a normative perspective at the seminar. But we can have sort of like a range of principles, which we tell them, these are the principles you should use. And if they collide, you should use these sort of other principles in order to adjudicate when they collide. And then we can say, okay, this is the relevant empirical material, or we can have them to find the relevant empirical material. And then we can have them to describe the solution, or I can describe the solution depending on if this is a lecture or not. So So just to make a picture clear here, we can have a range of principles which are so precisely stated that they can be actually used on the problem at hand. Then we can have a lot of empirical stuff which we feed into the theories, and then we get the solution. So that is actually how many teachers who are engineers and not philosophers like to teach, I have found, when I teach teachers, because then they can sort of like lay back, so to speak. They don't need to be that engaged. They can just be engaged in the sense that they can point out if someone uses the theory wrong or the principle wrong or have understood the principle wrong. They don't need to take responsibility for the actual discussion and engaging with the problem, because that's hard, of course. But many ethicists are doing this as well. And I'm not saying this is wrong or anything. I'm just saying that it can lead to this. This is a Rubik's Cube. My son got one from his grandparents, and now when he had a birthday, and he loves it. So he sits down and switches with it. It's a puzzle. And the problem here I found, and many other people have found when they look into this, is that people get completely detached from the ethical issue at hand. And I think that's a problem. If we think about the confidence, I want them to be confident in the solution. And one thing students often say, if they are completely detached and just see this as an algorithm, you have the principles, you have the empirical stuff, and then you put those together and some things comes out there. If you ask them, they say, if you ask them, would you suggest this? Would you argue for this solution in favor of your family or something like that? Should we believe in this? They often say, well, I don't know. I just use the theories you told me to use, right? And then we use this empirical stuff and just got this result. I don't know. I don't know if this is correct. Or some people might even say that I would never argue for this. This is crazy. This is these crazy theories. I don't have anything to do with this. But it's like it is here. Now I'm in the ethics lecture. Now I need to do something. So, right. Or we can have this sort of version. Now I have Viola's, where you are overly confident, where people say, well, we have used these theories. Perhaps if you use decision theory, you can get sort of mathematical formulas for how to weigh stuff and so on and so forth. It's science. We have the answer here. So then there is no room for for discussion or what have you. So these are just two problems I found when you sort of like try to be too formulaic, where you pick out, which Viola was also talking about before, when you pick out different sort of theories or principles and then use them on an empirical stuff. It might be that they become detached, the students or the teachers for that matter. And this leads to this sort of problem. If you think this is a problem, I think it is, but it's of course it's up for debate. Despair. It's the other side of the story. So I think that most of you, or I shouldn't say that. I grew up, as you heard before, at the University of Gothenburg. As a PhD student, you take some pedagogical courses. And that's great, I think. I think pedagogy is really important. But they often say this in those kind of situations. Sit down in small groups and discuss what is, so for instance, we had a group discussion first time, what is knowledge? Sit down and discuss. And of course, that's a great way to get people to start speaking and saying something. So that's really great. So I'm not saying anything about that. But I've also noticed that a lot of, so if my technological friends who are doing ethics in teaching, also medical, I should say, medical staff as well, either they want to take this formulaic stand, or they take this stand? We don't know. So use it, discuss, I listen, and then we hope that you solve it, basically. From philosophers often do something which is a variant of this. They say that, okay, there are these normative theories. All are basically falsified. There are all of these theories have these great problems and issues. So you can't really use them. So what should you do? So when I started to teach, I was the first year of my PhD education. I got the benefit of teaching people who were actually working in healthcare, and so I got to teach them, and they told me, because I guess I'm sort of approachable, that if you cannot say anything about what we should do in the situation, how should we be able to do that? You have sort of studied this for years, right? So it's very easy to fall in that bracket if you just say that, okay, nothing works, or sit down, work on this on your own, and find relevant empirical, then describe the solution. Then it sort of might feel as a exercise which doesn't give you anything. And that might lead to a lot of different things. Of course, abandonment. So many people say that, okay, why do ethics if you, who have studied this for 15 years, cannot say anything about the solution here? Why should I do this thing? But also poor reasoning, and you get sort of like a long text which is more like a debate, an article on an op-ed or something, which could be very well read and interesting, but it's not very clear what's argued for or what the arguments are or what have you. So you cannot actually evaluate the text, so to speak. Right. So what I usually do, and I think that you talked about this, or you were at least suggesting or point this, is to use what I called, I started to call today, enablers. Right, so I usually begin with giving them simple tools in argument analysis and decision analysis. And these need to be really simple because otherwise they will go into the puzzle solving mode. So I give them simple tools, which means that they get some structure to their analysis of a text and how to write their own text and how to take a decision in these sort of situations or circumstances. But they are simple and abstract, so they need to work on their own. And that's frustrating. And it could lead to despair if you don't recognize that and help them. But if you help them, then that frustration can lead to something else, which might be a frustration on a deeper level, which we philosophers feel all the time. But it could also be that you can see that, okay, I can reason in this way and I can make progress, even though it's really unclear here, or not unclear, but really uncertain whether or not I actually have it right. But at least I have given it a try, and I can show others how I think, and they can help me move on, and so on and so forth. Right, and so this helps them with devising their own arguments. And then after a while, you can sprinkle with more theories or codes of conduct or what have you, stuff which might be interesting and good, and helping them to devise their own moral standpoint, so to speak. So for instance, if we just take a practical example here, this is one paper I've used in the beginning of the biotech program. It's a Nature article which had a great impact when it came. It's about the human germline and why we shouldn't edit it. And when you read it through fast, it feels very convincing. And I sort of think that I agree with the thesis. And I think that most people do, actually. But it's very hard to know actually what the thesis is, how many there are, and what the arguments are in favor of the thesis. And that is something the students can learn to see really quickly. So if we just take the analysis of arguments thing, so the question here was, should we edit the human germline? And the answer was no, right? The paper said so. Then you can just, then I just use a very simple way of helping them to deal with these sort of questions and theses. So for instance, I usually give them 5 questions to answer or to ask a question and a thesis. So if you want to understand whether or not the thesis is precisely stated, then they can start with asking these questions. So should we edit the human germline? Who is we? What is it more exactly you want us to do here? How should we address this question? Where should it be addressed? Is it the EU, Sweden, whatever? When? Is it now? Is it in future? And so on. So I'm not going to go into this in detail now, but just asking a few questions might actually make the thesis and the question, which they might pose in a later stage when they write their own essay or when they write the group essay, to be more precise and more narrowly construed and then manageable. And then we also have, then they need to ask the text in this case, do we have reasonability thesis true or reasonable? And then the different premises has to do with truth, relevance, and Hume's law. Hume's law is just that a value thesis should be supported by at least one value premise. So then you can denote it this way. I like to do it in this way. You can do it in a lot of different ways. So for instance, the thesis could be denoted T here. We should not edit human germline now. It's a very unprecise thesis, but it fits here, so it's easy. And an argument in favor of the thesis, denoted as P1 here, of the first order, an argument of the first order. Editing the human germline now would lead to risks for future generations. And then you can have an argument in favor of the argument. Today's editing techniques often leads to off-target mutations, mosaicism, etc. This is actually what the paper says. And then you need to have some sort of supporting argument here in favor of P1. It needs to be relevant and valid, or relevant and at least reasonable. And it could be something like this. It's always morally wrong to put future generations at risk. And that is at least one interpretation of what the articles say, which students often pick up. Now, and I forced the students to do this already the first seminar. And the beauty with this is that now we have a very clear and defined thesis. It's not their own, and arguments. And then I have them to ask the text or the argumentative structure here. Okay, is the thesis precisely stated? How can it be more precisely stated? Do you agree with F1, P1 here, for instance? Well, obviously no, but it's something right about it. And then I get them to engage with that question. Now, since it's so squarishly written up here, it's very easy for me to see also how they interpret the text, and we can also discuss the text. And furthermore, when they, in the next seminar, write up their own thesis to a question, we can discuss that in the same way. So it becomes very clear and very easy to manage. And it gives them a tool which they can use to analyze whichever text. Now, decision-making supports, I've already seen in the chat, there are many. I use different ones depending on what class I hold and so on and so forth. I just think that it's important that they are not highly technical and highly specialized, because that sort of makes them to become more puzzle solving and not as frustrated as I want them to be. So if we take this one again, should we edit human germline? And we have some context provided to them. Perhaps they watched Gattaca, the movie, which is about germline screening, but still it's similar, or some other context, case study or something. In this sort of situation instead, when they don't have a text to analyze, they need to ask a few questions. And this is one which I often use: who is or are the agents? That is, who has the responsibility for anything happening, who has the decision-making power, or what have you? What are the options or actions? What are the consequences from these actions? And who is affected by these consequences and how? Now, if you ask these 4 questions, then it's very easy to see, because the 5th question is about what the relevant normative considerations are. So what should we think about in this sort of situation? Now, if they write up the answers to 1 to 4 really clearly and very thoroughly, then a lot of these sort of relevant normative considerations, which I want them to notice, pop up, and they see them by themselves. So if some group is put at great risk, for instance, and they are not one of the agents, then many students see this. Oh, but these farmers who are supposed to be using this fertilizer, they have no control over what fertilizer to use, because blah, blah, blah. They can see that by themselves, and that makes them involved and engaged with the topic. And the normative principles they devise, we can use those to develop them during the course later on. Then they can use the same principles again on the next topic, and I can help them. They can read text about how to refine their way of thinking, and that makes them engaged and interested, and also sort of like they feel that it's actually their views who are developing here, and they also get in touch with other views which they can add in different sort of ways. Right, so the ambition here was high. I want them to be solving problems, or at least starting solving problems in a transparent and well-reasoned way with reasonable confidence, not too overly confident. And so that's one ambition. We have more ambitions than that. Viola talked about, for instance, that they should be able to know a lot of stuff. I mean, that's crucial. So there are a lot of these sort of different things they need to know, but that's one ambition. And one problem is the puzzle-solving despair dilemma, which I talked about. And a possible solution here, at least, which I have used in the recent years. I didn't teach this. I haven't taught in this way all the time. This is something I've devised in recent years, is use enablers, which are sort of helps people to structure the problem and the solution, so to speak, but also to analyze text they read or debates they hear. So then they can use their own sort of moral views and stuff when they engaged with perhaps normative theories or what have you. Thank you for listening, everyone. I think that you have listened anyways.
Thank you very much, Carl, for an exciting talk and another sort of approach to the same topic. Really very enriching and inspiring. And what do you think? Could you also make a list of a number of issues that you think are very crucial, so that we can discuss in the breakout rooms?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we have time. We have little time. Maybe if we ask questions during 5 minutes and then take break 10 minutes until full hour, then we will come back. So 5 minutes for questions. Please, if you have any questions, state them now. 5 minutes for discussion, short discussion about 2 keynotes. They were very intense and rich and exhaustive, so I think maybe we need some little break, but maybe if there is somebody who absolutely must ask a question. Okay, then I will ask a question to Viola. If you could imagine ideal future for your own work with your subject, what would you prefer to see happening? How would you improve this situation from today?
It's a very difficult question, of course. One possible optimal outcome should be to have more young scholars working at the intersection about these topics, and having them so in the technical university in which I work. This is surely very, very important. So, and also to offer, I mean, they can be of extreme importance for us to enlarge the instructors that can teach these classes. But at the same time, I think they can offer, let's say, a context in which philosophers and social scientists can be embedded into scientific and engineering departments. And then I really think that also co-teaching is very important and promising. It's very difficult. I just started this semester an experiment on this, and in particular with a colleague coming from the field of power systems and electrical engineering. It's very difficult, extremely difficult, time demanding, but I think this makes a difference also in the message that we can give to students. So just to summarize, better integration between education and research, and educating a generation of scholars in this direction, and second, co-teaching.
Thank you very much, Viola.
Thank you.
Any question from the audience? Then I would ask the same question, Carl. What would you imagine as the best scenario?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. So I agree with Viola about what she said. So I was thinking about, you were talking about modules in the beginning here. So just to be very practical. Today I have 2 courses, as I said, and I think it's problematic if we only have, and as you said here in the beginning, if we only have ethics in a course which is separated from the program in different sort of ways. So of course, I, and as Viola did, we work to become very practically oriented, and work with a lot of cases and show them. So actually, my ethics and technology course, what students often say they appreciate with that is that they get a sort of, they become more well educated in different sorts of technologies. So I have a new technology for each week. So they learn a lot about different sort of technologies. But still, it's hard with legitimacy. I mean, so it's sort of like go to a cultural event. It's really nice if you're not a culture person, you feel good about yourself perhaps, but it's not really anything to do with you really. So I think that we need to have modules with progression in the program. So we don't only need modules in the program, in engineering programs, they need to have progression, and they need to be coordinated. And I see it as the biggest practical not the biggest, but if we just take Chalmers, KTH, and Uppsala, which I have experience from, that is the biggest problem, I would say, when it comes to having modules instead of courses, because all of these universities have a lot of good modules, but they are not coordinated. So one time you can have an extremely advanced thing, and then you can have a very simple thing, and then you have the same thing, and then you have the same thing again, and so on and so forth. And it's simply really hard to work out a structure for coordinating modules. So I think that you should always think about that when you advocate a module approach. I have done that at Chalmers as well, and I still do. But you should always bring that with you. I think that a course is still something that someone owns and someone takes care of, and you can have progression and stuff like that. So it's yeah, so you should really think about those two solutions and the different problems.
Thank you very much. Very valuable points and these experiences from both keynote speakers. So thank you so much. And now we have only 5 minutes break, but until full hour. Thank you very much. Okay, now it's time to start our second block in the workshop, entitled Teaching Ethics to Computer Science and Engineering Students, Experiences from Swedish University Context. We will have 3 speakers. The first one is Olle Häggström. Each person will have 15 minutes presentation. So I would like to ask Olle to start. Please, Olle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gordana, for organizing this meeting. I'm very glad to be here. So I'm going to talk about a course that I've been giving annually since 2015 on new technologies, global risk, and the future of humanity. So it was initially developed together with Wilhelm Verendel, whom you see on the right here, and he was a bit involved early on, but gradually I took over more and more of the course. So having listened to the talks by Viola and Carl, my mind is now going at full speed about how I could give the course differently next time, but for the purpose of this very short presentation, I'm just going to try to suppress those thoughts and just describe how we've been doing it. So the course is in Swedish. It's elective at all engineering programs at Chalmers. So the structure is that it's obligatory at all these programs to take at least one course with a very much humanities or social science profile. So we have a smorgasbord of these different courses, and this course is one of them. So the purpose of this particular course is to stimulate students to start thinking about the social ramifications and ethics of the new technologies that they, in their future careers, will be part of developing and deploying. And I have this secret, or really not so secret, mission with the course, which is to instill them with the sense of responsibility, which was expressed in an amazing paper by Norbert Wiener from 1960. And if you'd see this paper today in 2021, someone published it, maybe it's not so amazing, but in 1960, I think this was fantastic. Wiener said that we can by no means always justify the naive assumption that the faster we rush ahead to employ the new powers for action which are open to us, the better it will be. We must always exert the strength of our imagination to examine where the full use of our new modalities may lead us. That's a kind of a guiding light. And I'll just, so the course is not primarily built around lectures, but we do have lectures, and just to give a sense of the content, I'll list them. There's first an introductory lecture, and there is one on ethics, ethical frameworks, examples, and so on. Next lecture is on decision theory and human rationality versus our tendencies towards irrational thinking. next lecture on existential risks and the emerging ethical idea of effective altruism. So you can say these four are more about the frameworks for the course, and the remainder of the lectures are more about specific examples. COVID-19 and other pandemics is kind of obvious thing at present to talk about, but I think that this will actually continue. AI risk and AI ethics. Also, Willem Verendel has had these last few years a wonderful guest lecture on weapons technologies, bioterrorism, and all the dilemmas around mass surveillance and related technologies that show up around this. Then there's one on climate change, and finally a lecture on transhumanism versus bioconservatism, where we kind of open up the question that Carl used as an example about whether or not we should edit the human germline. But the lectures, as I said, is not the main part. The main part is the project that the students do in pairs on a topic of their own choice. And we thought from the beginning that this was a good idea because we have students for all different directions of computer science and physics and engineering and so on. And these projects will be a way for them to bring their own particular competencies into the course and even maybe help each other in showing different things. So some sample topics. Sometimes we have duplicates of topics during a course. I don't think that is a problem. The first one on the list here, AI-driven automation and the labor market, has been kind of the most popular topic over the years. We usually have at least one or two projects centered around that each year. But then the topics can be as diverse as asteroid mining, autonomous vehicles, genetic engineering on humans, geoengineering via solar radiation management, nanotechnology in medicine, radical life extension, and so on and so forth. So these are just examples. So this is all fun for me and for most of the students. I want to mention a couple of complications that I've become aware of over the years. One is that we have this small but possibly increasing minority of students who cheat, mainly through presenting project reports that are not really their original material. And for me, as a mathematics teacher from the beginning, this is kind of new because examining in mathematics is much easier, but having them go home and write reports and essays and so on is of course much more complicated than that. And I think I know how to catch them when they plagiarize something that is published. But we have this new phenomenon of essay factories in the third world, where the students can simply outsource to someone, for instance, sitting in Kenya and writing student essays for a living. And I've had some suspicious examples of this going on, but it's much harder to confront the students and say, I think you're cheating in this case. Still, this is a small minority, so I think we shouldn't get too boggled down because I think that for most of the students, they take the opportunity to learn in a much better way. Another complication is that since these are engineering students, it seems that their spontaneous tendency is to focus on the science and technology of the problem and less on the ethics. We saw that in the first year we gave the course and thought about how can we trigger them to early on in the project actually start thinking about the ethics. And the solution that we found was to have an early preliminary deadline, which we have several deadlines throughout the course, but we have one early on in the work on the project, which is dedicated to ethics, where the students are asked to outline how they plan to treat ethical aspects of the topic they are studying. And in order to help them, like if they don't know where to start, we suggest that they use one of two particular frameworks for addressing ethics of technology. And there's this one scheme of Sven-Ove Hansson from KTH, which works kind of step by step. First, identify stakeholders and their roles. Second, identify factual circumstances that are relevant. Third, compare to parallel cases. Then investigate the problem via more than one moral theory. Look whether you have convergence. Fifth, try to construct new options. And lastly, figure out whether the proposed solutions are actually doable. And then we have found an alternative scheme, which is mostly similar, but is different in various ways. And I think that the exact details of the scheme is not important here. And I think one point of giving two alternative such schemes is to reinforce to the student that this is not an algorithmic procedure. There is not one particular way that you should go about this. So this is the project part. Then another problem we discovered was that a few of our students are very street smart and trying to get their course credits using as little work as possible. And some of them discovered that you can actually do that without attending most of the lectures. And I don't want to make lectures obligatory. I don't think that that's the right kind of motivation for them to go and attend the lectures. But the way we found works pretty well is that besides the project, examination is also through a concluding essay, which the students write individually, which I think is good also because it gives an opportunity for students to show that they are individually good and not just as part of the team. And they are asked to reflect broadly on what they have learned in the course. And there is an explicit requirement that they should reflect on and build on ideas that have been communicated in the lectures. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ole, for your great insights and experiences in this on this topic, and for fantastic time holding. Exactly, you are a mathematician, that's obvious. But yeah, we will discuss some of those points. They are really worth discussing in our workshop afterwards. So let us go to our next speaker. It is Katrin Strong-Hansen, who will tell us about her course AI Ethics Through Fiction. Please, Katrin.
Hopefully everyone can see my slides. Hi, everyone. Great, thanks, Carl. Like Ole said, this afternoon has been kind of a series of pedagogical and intellectual riches, so my head's spinning. But I'll tell you about my course called AI Ethics Through Fiction, which I've taught here at Chalmers. It's through not a particular program, but an intervention called TRACS, which I won't go into too much, but it's basically an endeavor that emphasizes interdisciplinary projects. It's an optional course that might be helpful to know as well. And it's offered at both the bachelor's and the master's level. And in either case, the students earn 7.5 credits. So it's a fairly full course. It talks about both existing problems and speculative future issues that might come up with artificial intelligence. And there are a couple of main assignments. Probably the biggest one is a written reflection on ethics issues in one of the texts, the fictive texts that we look at. And students also give a topic presentation. And the main aim of the course, if I boil it down to just one, is to show students that fiction, the reading of it and discussion and reflection of it, can be a springboard to ethical discussions and ethical reflections. You might be thinking, as I think many people do when I tell them about this, why fiction? So let me answer that. One of the benefits of fiction is that it is fictive. It's removed from reality, and that level of removal from reality can do several things. Students might feel pressure to answer something the right way, and they might be constructing right, oh, the instructor wants this answer, or they might construct right as this is a case study from real life issues, and I know how I should answer based on how this was really adjudicated in real situations. So fiction removes that. It is potentially a little more of, I don't necessarily want to say a playground, but there's a little more free reign for students to feel comfortable with their responses. Fiction has other beneficial elements as well, and I won't go into all of them, but as much as we value scientific and technological advances, and obviously I think we all do, they need some grounding with the human, with the ethical and moral dimensions. And so, as you can see in this particular quote that I've presented on the slide, integration with the arts and humanities really helps science and technology become stronger, not just morally, but it may well be the case that it becomes stronger technically as well. So fiction can lend itself to STEM instruction in really interesting ways. And the way that this course that I've taught uses it, this is essentially the question that I ask students to answer in the main writing assignment. So they pick one of the fictional texts that applies to literary as well as cinematic or televisual texts. I'm pretty broad in my construction of the term text. So they pick one, and then they have to respond to the question, how might real world AI creators incorporate ethical reflection on this issue into their work? So even if this is a speculative issue, maybe it's something that has not been actually achieved yet, students still have to respond to it in thinking about how this relates to existing possible AI. And the groups are allowed to select their own audience. And I say groups, I also give students the option to work individually. But since this is an interdisciplinary endeavor, sometimes those discussions across disciplinary lines lead to interesting discussions and points of view. They have a few different options for the form their writing might take. If they're comfortable with a more traditional report style text, they're welcome to write that kind of IMRAD report. They can construct their response as a popular science essay, or they're welcome to write a piece of creative writing. My rule there, however, is they do have to include a statement of what their created fiction expresses about the AI ethics issue. So they have to explicitly engage with that. It would be possible to skirt that a bit in writing creative work. So I don't let them do that. But these aren't the only kinds of assignments that could be created with fiction. There are many, but some examples I'll give here, depending on what it is you might want to do. Have your students write a CV or a short traditional report from the point of view of a fictional character. And the examples here on the screen are both written written as if by Ted Long, a character in Isaac Asimov's short story, The Martian Way. This is a story where there are different points of view from different characters. So if you had someone writing as Ted Long, there's another character, John Hilder, who disagrees with this character. So you can possibly get some interesting discussion across these issues, because students taking that point of view have to have kind of a narrative sympathy with a character and his or her beliefs as expressed through the fiction. It's a good idea, however, to also have that kind of companion explanation. So not necessarily a written one, but students would need to explain, for instance, why did you give Ted Long those objectives on his resume? What made you have that idea that this is something he would believe? So this can lead to some interesting insights, and students have to really think fairly carefully as that character would in order to do this kind of task. I have some examples as well of some of the literary fictions I've used. I'm here giving examples of fictions that deal specifically with artificial intelligence, but as has been mentioned, Carl mentioned the movie Gattaca, which is an excellent film about a frightening glimpse of a biologically engineered future. So these deal with AI. But there are other ways of approaching artificial intelligence through texts that take a broader view. And Viola said something in her talk about dealing with overarching issues that are ethical in nature, that reoccur in probably most disciplines. And these kind of oblique general ethics themes can be seen, for example, in maybe one that works almost anywhere could be Frankenstein. It is rather long, so it's perhaps not the easiest text to use, maybe excerpts from it. Ted Chiang writes beautifully and wonderfully about technology, and a lot of what he writes isn't necessarily AI specific, but the issues in his works still would allow us to make some sidesteps into the arena of artificial intelligence. And if you've never read the Ursula K. Le Guin story, spoiler alert, it might not be happy, but it's an excellent text if you want to talk about ethical issues. Again, not necessarily AI specific, but issues of responsibility, of what one member of a society owes to another, and how advancements of some form, technological or other, might relate to that. Those discussions could be quite rich. Literary fictions, as I mentioned before, are the only form of fiction. There are, for instance, television programs that deal with all kinds of topics, and this is just a very, very small sampling. There may be whole series that deal with these issues, or perhaps certain episodes. And some great examples, Black Mirror is almost like a compendium of ethical issues about technology that could suit almost any topic. And if you are seeking something that might not be so dystopian, the Black Mirror episode from season 3, episode 4, San Junipero, could be interpreted a little more hopefully. You could also interpret it a little dystopian-like, but that's a separate issue we can go into. And then, of course, the image on this particular slide is from Star Trek: The Next Generation, which has a fairly famous character, Data, who has a positronic brain. And the scene represented there is where Data is essentially arguing in a legal situation. Someone is arguing on his behalf, I should say, whether he has rights to himself as an AI. So these kinds of issues are raised really compellingly in fiction that maybe we see in not as many other arenas. I'm going at a little bit of a fast clip so I can get through to other issues as well, like films. You might have already thought of some of these films on the slide when I mentioned AI, ethics, and fiction. These films have AI kind of constructed as human-like entities, but there are other films as well that deal with AI in other ways. Moneyball, for instance, there isn't a robot or an android or an artificial intelligence of that sort, but it still raises issues that could be quite rich for discussion. And in Minority Report, we have humans who might be considered AI, so there could be some interesting discussion there as well. And of course, like with all these slides, these are just a very, very small number of examples that I thought might be useful. But it could also be useful to think of other media that involve some kind of fictive approach. There's a website, for instance, called This Person Does Not Exist. And the person on this slide I'm showing to you does not exist. It's created by AI, and that child looks very, very real, which again can foster some really interesting conversation. There's also the game called Universal Paperclips, where you can run an AI that makes paperclips, and you can see what happens when it's given a directive to make paperclips and try to make as many paperclips as possible. If you haven't played that game, enjoy. I'd like to conclude by talking just a little bit about how you might use fiction if this is something you're thinking of doing. We've talked about how, yes, it's quite nice to have these separate courses where where ethics can be used. And in this case, I use it with fiction. That might not be the case for everyone. So there might be some uses of fiction in other modules and courses. It's partially for this reason that most of what I've mentioned in the talk have been short pieces of fiction, stories rather than novels. I did mention the name of one novel, but it's awfully hard to deal with an entire novel when you don't have a separate course. But you could assign, for instance, a short story and conduct a discussion about the ethical issues that come up with a technological advancement in that story. Either a very real one that exists in our own current reality, or a speculative one that could potentially be brought into existence, but perhaps hasn't yet been brought into existence. You might think of a discussion board topic where if you use a learning management system like Canvas, Blackboard, or something similar that has a discussion board, if you want students to discuss these issues with each other, you could assign a reflection on a specific ethical issue in the text, or raise a question that the text poses and ask students to answer that and respond to each other. This would be probably most usefully followed up in class, where you talk about the ideas and reflections that came up in this way. You could concentrate on the more speculative advancements and talk about how perhaps they could be made more ethical in their development. If they don't exist yet, you could talk about the process and how ethics could be a part of that process even before these advancements exist. Or you could use some kind of combination. But one of the elements that fiction brings here is a reminder to students that their work as an engineer, as a scientist, doesn't just end in the lab. It doesn't just end with report writing or developing technologies. These technologies go out into the world and they interact with humans. There's a very, very human dimension to their work. And fiction, with its emphasis on emotion and affect, really encapsulates that quite nicely. So I've tried to go through very speedily, but in the breakout rooms, perhaps we can talk a little bit more. But that's what I have for you, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for a great talk. Thank you. What do you think? So you propose that we discuss it in breakout rooms, or what should we do? Shall we ask the audience to ask questions to Ule and you in this moment, or shall we postpone?
I'm happy either way. I just didn't know if I was running a little bit long on time. So I'm happy whichever way you select.
Thank you very much. Shall we ask Ule, what would you prefer? discussion now or?
Either way, you're in control of the program and the schedule.
Okay, thank you so much. In that case, I would propose that I run my presentation. That is the last one, because Wilhelm is not here. He has some emergency work. So thank you for great presentations, and I will go and try to share my screen with you. Let's see if it works. Do you see it? You see it, great, thank you so much. So I really want to thank all the speakers before me, because you have pointed out so many important things that I will just go very quickly through in my presentation. I was thinking to present my work in ethics as teaching ethics with a research-based perspective. And in a moment, I will tell you why. So this is my introduction. I started teaching ethics in 2001, and I have been teaching students from computer science, engineering, interaction design, occasionally economics. And the courses are professional ethics, research ethics and sustainable development, emerging trends and critical topics in interaction design, human-centered design, research methods in natural sciences and engineering, advanced computational thinking and writing research toolbox, computational thinking and writing, that's the first part of this course, and information knowledge science ethics, which is in Swedish course taught to master students or bachelors as well. So there were many courses, and not all of them were totally ethics, but some of them were dedicated blocks, and some of them are complete ethics courses, and I will show you my ethics courses here. I would like to draw your attention to this quote from Peter Bowden, who says, "The course was based on the assumption that identifying the major ethical issues in the discipline and subsequently presenting and analyzing them in the classroom would provide the future professionals with knowledge of the ethical problem that they were likely to face on graduation." So I have chosen to present topics which are hot, which were right now being researched, and that could attract attention people from those fields. So as Carl said, if you teach too many different specialities, then you have to learn about their problems and their technologies and their all those things. But anyway, the idea is to come to them with your knowledge about the field and learn from them about what they know. So it's really collegial, it's on the same level, and we exchange and learn from each other. That's really so in the classroom. I just show you in a minute ethics publication in collaboration with my students. Those are the articles in journals, articles presented at conferences, and just very quickly, we have been, in the first part, we have been working together, so you will see me as a co-author, but in some other parts, they were, for example, here, we had a doctoral symposium at IS for SI conference, and it was students themselves who wrote those papers and presented at the conference. And some of my students presented at the IACAP and other good and internationally known conferences, and sometimes they were master students, and nobody believed that it was not a PhD student who was presenting. So I was very, very happy for those students I could work with, and I could help them meet the research environment, meet other researchers, learn about ethics in a bigger contents. So it was a course in computing and philosophy. That was national Swedish course in which a big block was dedicated to ethics. And we had guest lecture of Luciano Floridi and many other important people from the field of ethics. And in this course, several people have written important papers that they published later on. So paper was part of the examination. So, for example, Kristina Björkman has written Feminist Theory in Computing Science. And I'm happy to know that Kristina is here in the audience, and some more people writing on different aspects, ethical aspects. So I think that was the highlight of my career as teacher in ethics, to get privileged to work together with students, especially with PhD students who know much more about different fields they are specialized in than I, so I could learn so much. And this is an example of my ethics introductory lecture. I will just walk you very super briefly. So that was for the student of automation and software engineering. So we started with their handbook, so to see how it looks like. And then I asked them to tell me which technology aspects do they find as the most important in their own field. And then I got a lot of answers, data related, sustainability related. And then I asked about methodology aspects, of course, ethical side of it. And then they answered with their in this questionnaire, and then on social aspects. And then I synthesized those questions and then started to present something that they might be interested in. So my idea is to present something they are thinking about, they take seriously, they think it is a real world problem, and I would like to address it. So that was ethics of AI in the end, ethics of autonomous cars, many of us teaching and discussing gender issues. That was my specific interest, and you see that there is a good reason to think of it. And moving technology ahead. And then I took CACM journal, ACM journal, from the August, the same month when we had the lecture. And I just listed how many titles in these technical journals that were dedicated to ethics, connected to ethics. It was amazing, so many things that we could use in the classroom directly. And then I made slowly the introduction to what Carl and Viola are experts in philosophical and ethical issues, classical things, to get us at least some ideas about what ethics is and how it has been working in functioning in history. And then facing grand challenges, so many challenges, natural, unintended consequences of technology and so on. And what it means, responsible research and innovation that we have in European Union, and University of the Future, and Science for Society. Those things already exist in Europe. Organizational adaptation in the era of complexity. Viola talked a lot about complexity that is necessary, absolutely necessary to understand what is going on, and educating engineers for the future. And I think several of you pointed out that we are educating something that is called T-shaped engineers. It means they are very deep, but at the same time they are broad. That's a very Bohm idea or concept of a T-shaped engineer. We need to have more humanities and ethics, among others, in education for engineers. And then the basics of ethics and morality and those things that I'm usually introducing. And one of the big blocks is values. So I introduce necessity of values for knowledge and how the knowledge is produced, and so a lot about values and references to values, requirements, standards. This book of Sarah Spiekerman, very good book. And this necessity to get stakeholders, because we all see world in different light. So you can take a different wavelength and you see different picture, different world. So very often we are talking about the same world, but looking at the different wavelengths. and taking into account that we are really stakeholders and we have all our perspectives. So what is happening in academic research, in industrial research, and also cognitively, we are all biased cognitively. That is something to keep in mind. No one has an absolute picture of the world or absolute truth about the world. We have, all of us, different biases. And then this is back to Luciano Floridi's information ethics, and why we need to know something about the world in order to be able to reason about ethics of those phenomena. So, cultivating ethical sensitivity that Carl was talking about, and classical mode 1 and mode 2 research, where we have applications and theoretical research. Do we go for case studies? Do we go for theoretical frameworks? Do we need to combine somehow? And understanding where we are in the world as a subject thinking about ethics. So we can say sometimes philosophy is thinking on the level of subject, of individual, but there is microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem, like the whole society. And all of them have different perspectives on. This is a fine-grained picture of those different worlds that go complexly into each other. And then you mentioned also there are documents and policies and as a society, both as ethicists, but as engineers, we have different sorts of communicating what is expected from us as professionals. And then there are those ethics policies and different sorts of documents. And this is the conclusions. Many people mentioning guest lectures, and I find it also extremely valuable. Sharing experiences in peer review meetings and group work. This is my team from Chalmers. People collaborating in the course, and that was a PhD course. My first course in ethics was at Mälardalen, and I met exactly the same problems as you mentioned. You introduce new course, and people are asking which course must go out as you are proposing a new one. So I think I feel it is much easier today. It's better today than the year 2000 and so. People have started to understand that ethics makes good sense. It makes a lot of sense. This is a picture of my course, lectures and guest lectures of different invited speakers, and course wrap up. And the last lecture always in all my courses is mini conference, where students present their either projects or papers that they have written in the course. And this is another course. This is a PhD course that was in Chalmers. And I will just show you the course overview. We were talking about principles, and then science and society, peer reviews. So they were writing papers and reviewing each other papers. They had meetings and mini conference. And just shortly, examination forms in my courses. It was individual class notes. They would write down not about the facts in each lecture or guest lecture, but about their own reflections on them. So it was really very subjective and very person dependent. And then in class presentation of a chosen topics, they would present for us, and then research paper. And I showed you the list of papers that we managed to publish in different venues, and presentations on the mini conference for everybody with discussion. And obstacles in the future. In the beginning, it was not easy to develop a course, as I told you. We hope with this project to change it and encourage, support colleagues by exchange of experiences and resources, of course, development. So this whole project is meant to support our colleagues and ourselves in producing new courses and new lectures in ethics. And in the future, given explosive development of intelligent, nanobio, neuro, medical, and also, the other emerging technologies, that can radically change our personal lives and the whole civilization, it is of central importance that professionals contribute to our common knowledge about the features and possibilities of emerging technologies. And that's my idea, that we as engineers and professionals are responsible to share with us our understanding of technology inside, because no politicians, no general public knows what is it in those boxes for which our engineers are really responsible. So this is the last slide, some conclusions. What I find the most important for me, and all of us have our own perspectives and then the ways to approach this topic. Thinking about relevance for students' context, generalizability and applicability, and that's not in this, how to say, it's not in a generalizability in the sense, not in the sense of a strict generalizability, but this feeling of that this is relevant for myself as well, even if it is different. And the humble teaching attitude, I found it really very important, and I learned it the hard way. So no preaching and no besserwisser, no all attitude. Always suppose that the person, even if they are not agreeing with you, might be right, and give students space to express themselves and to oppose themselves. Using authority power with utmost care. Sometimes you must use authority, and as a teacher you have it, but use it with care. That's my feeling. Ethics is not about being perfect, but being as good as reasonably possible. Introducing students to the world of research was important for me always. Cultivating analytic synthetic, both analytic synthetic thinking, logic argument, that was what Carl was talking about, respect for different positions, traditions and cultures, arguing for necessity of understanding the subject matter, that was technology. From my part, I could help with this part specifically. Choices of the topics discussed with students. Interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity was really, really very important, but that was something that we all agree about. Okay, keeping in mind, we are educating for the future, so thinking towards the future, and T-shaped engineers, as I told you. So this presentation can be found on my webpage, and also references to all the articles and all the original work, open access on this link. So I would like to thank you so much for this opportunity to think about what I have been doing as a teacher, because I was always teaching, never thinking on a meta level what I was doing. So the last few days, I was just searching for, oh, what have I been doing all those years? So it was really a great opportunity. Thank you so much. Okay, so I will stop sharing. Thank you. Thank you.